Before we leave the topic of prototypes and begin using them, I want to emphasize a point, which you may have already figured out, but I want to make sure it is known. And that is a method or property of an object will always override the method or property of the same name on a prototype object. In other words, when the JavaScript engine is looking for a method or a property, it looks first on the object. If the object has it, it uses that version and ignores anything it might find in the prototype chain. Let's look at a quick example that might also be helpful for other reasons. So I'm going to create a very simple object here. Obj is what we'll call it. And I'm going to have an fname property. Jorge will make the fname, and then I'm going to put an age of 45. That's all we'll have right now in this particular object. Let me go ahead and save that. I'm going to just resize this a bit, and we're going to go to the console here. And first thing I want to do, there's our object. We can see that pretty easily. And what happens if I do value of? It shows me the object as an object. So I can navigate through that. I can see the prototype. Where does that value of property come from, or that value of method? It comes from the prototype. We can see that right here. All right. So we can also verify that it doesn't belong to the object by doing has own property, and then inside of that doing value of, like this, and that comes back false. So we know that the value of method is not a property on the object. That's pretty obvious at this point. But we also know that we can access it because it finds it on the prototype chain and it prints it out this way. Now let's do something really quick. Let's do a 5 plus obj. Notice what gets printed out. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from the toString method. Generally, when an object needs to be converted to a primitive value, it uses the value of method to do that. But in the case of a string situation, it will use toString to do that conversion. If value of returns something that could be coerced into a string, then it will use value of. But right now, what value of is returning cannot be coerced into a string. So it uses the toString method. So let's just do a couple of changes here. Let's go back to that object, and I'm going to first do a toString method. And we'll have it return this.fname. That's what we're going to have the toString method return. Whoops, I put a period there. There we go. Now let's save that. And let's jump out and do that same command again. And notice what we get. Because we overrode the toString method that is in the prototype chain, that is on the object's prototype, we now get the value that is designated by the toString method on the object itself. All right, now let's add a value of method. And this can be very helpful if you need an object to be able to convert to a number. Let's just go ahead and do value of. And for this, I'm going to have it return a number, which is the age. Okay. Now, let's save this. Let's jump out. Let's do that same thing again. And now look what happens. Now, because this is a number, it's going to try to get a primitive value from the object using value of first. Since value of is returning a number, then it's treated like a number and basically adds those two things together. Now, what would happen if we had a string? Let's do something like this: object plus obj. Well, it accesses the value of method. It always tries to access that first if it needs to convert it to a primitive value. If it can coerce to a string, it will do that. 45 can be coerced to a string, and so it does, and it returns a string here. But since by default it is a number, when we use it with a number, it will return the number. It will act like a number, like we've seen here. So there we've overridden the properties, the methods that are on the prototype of an object we create. It's a part of the object constructor, and that is toString and value of. We overrode those. So now this object uses the ones that are local to it instead of the ones on the prototype chain. Now, we've covered a lot about prototypes, and with this knowledge, we can begin applying them without the mystery of prototypes. Too many people jump into working with objects in JavaScript and don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. It is so much better to understand why things are working a particular way and why prototypes do the things they do in JavaScript. And that's important to know because prototypes are used throughout JavaScript. All right, let's move on.